Should we kick off the webinar?
I think we should, yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So good morning in Canada and good afternoon in Sweden, and welcome to this webinar organized by Business Sweden on the topic of circular fashion. I think this is a topic that is gaining momentum, not just from consumers, but also from companies, organizations, and academia. And we have them all represented here today with a great lineup of speakers from both Sweden and Canada. So thank you all for taking your time in your busy schedule to listen in to our speakers, and please don't be shy to ask questions in our interactive Q&A session after the presentations. I think it's very appropriate that we are having this conversation today on the eve of Black Friday, the largest shopping week of the year. And this will give some reflection and balance to the need of reducing and reusing and recycle the clothes that we are wearing, and to think about the environmental impact that the textile industry has on our earth. My name is Christina Kieran, and I am the country manager at Business Sweden here in Toronto. And for those who are not familiar with Business Sweden, we are a government organization, half owned by the Swedish government and half owned by the Swedish industry. We are present at 39 markets around the world, and we have an office here in Canada, in Toronto, that we share with the other Nordic countries, Finland, Norway, and Denmark. All in all, we are over 400 people around the world, but in Toronto there's 8 of us. And our mission is really to help Swedish companies grow global sales and international companies to invest and expand in Sweden. Now, today, my colleagues have worked very hard to organize this event, and we have attracted some great speakers on this very interesting topic. And I will let my colleague, Patricia Boog Jensen, speak a little bit about what is circular fashion, first of all, and then she will introduce the speakers. So, Patricia, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Christina. As Christina mentioned, my name is Patricia Boog Jensen, and I'm a project manager here at Business Sweden in Toronto. Today, I'll be moderating this webinar with you. So once again, a very warm welcome to our webinar on the evolving circular fashion landscape in both Sweden and Canada. So just before we start, a couple of housekeeping items to keep in mind. This webinar will be recorded for your convenience, and a link will be sent to you after the webinar. Presentations that you will see today will also be shared with you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat, and we'll save them for the Q&A session at the very end of this webinar. And may I also please remind you all to turn off your microphones and put them on mute during their presentations. And let's have a look at what circular fashion is. So basically, it's about moving away from a linear model of taking, making, and wasting into this more circular model of reusing and repairing as much as possible before recycling. And this is really about maximizing the product, the value of the product, and the resources. So if you focus on the graphic to your right, you can see that it consists of 3 components, one of them being circular products, which is really about creating a product that is made to last. The second component would be the circular supply chains, and that is really about building supply chains that keeps the products and resources in circulation. And the third one would be the circular customer journey, and this is about making it easy for the customers to experience but also engage in circular fashion. So the objective here is to have products and resources circulating around these multiple loops, as you can see, of repair, reuse, remake, and recycle, for as long as possible and maintain them within the ecosystem for a longer time, for a longer period. And with this short introduction, I would like to hand it over the floor to our first speaker for today, which is Kelly Drennan from Fashion Takes Action. And she's going to talk about the state of the industry and Canada's circular fashion. The floor is yours, Kelly.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to share with you some of the work that we're doing at Fashion Takes Action around circularity in the fashion industry. Just first quickly, Fashion Takes Action is a nonprofit organization that I started in 2007 with the mission to advance sustainability across the entire fashion system, which means we work with both consumers and industry. Next. So we started talking about circularity in fashion a number of years ago, back in 2015. We host an annual conference called the World Ethical Apparel Roundtable, or the WEAR Conference, as it's become to be known. And so we first explored the topic, as I mentioned, in 2015. In 2016, we actually hosted a lab at WEAR on the topic of textile waste diversion. And it was the first time that we really brought together a group of multiple stakeholders. So not just apparel brands and retailers, but also really engaging industry associations, academics, municipalities, charities, and collectors. And through that, we actually were able to determine some common areas of challenges and opportunities. And we realized that that was really sort of the way forward in terms of addressing the growing problem of textile waste and then looking at solutions that were more circular. And so taking this collective impact approach, we actually created sort of a working group with a bunch of stakeholders, about 40 in total, same sort of groups that I was mentioning previously, and actually went through a phase of research and created working groups, all with the goal to look at how are we going to reduce the amount of textiles going into the landfill, but then also making sure that we have a use for those textiles, whether that's reuse, repurpose, or recycling. Next. So part of this work was really, was really important for us to get together in this sort of lab style workshops where we could understand really just the complexity of the issue from all of these different perspectives. This is a very holistic approach to systems change. You can't just come up with solutions in a silo, of course. So what might work for a retailer might have a negative impact on a charity. What could be a good solution for a municipality might also not work for another stakeholder. So really coming together in this way and doing these 4 full-day labs where we also were able to create definitions and sort of this baseline understanding as well as consensus around what the issues were, which helped us then develop our theory of change. Next. So we had a number of working groups, the first one being policy and regulations. So we really were able to, we supported the provincial regulation of new material only to become recycled content as well, which is now in Ontario, and there's only 2 provinces left in Canada where the stuffed articles regulation still requires new material. And so this was efforts were sort of led by the Canadian Apparel Federation and the Retail Council of Canada. So we supported that. We also did a deep dive into the federal duty drawback regulation, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of some of the recommendations we have moving forward. But for those of you not familiar with this, it actually is sort of a perverse incentive for apparel retailers to destroy unsellable goods. So really what the government does through the Canadian Border Services Agency is they'll issue an import tax credit on your next duty if you can prove destruction of unsellable goods. So we'll come back to that, as I mentioned before, but we really did this deep dive on that policy just to see how we could possibly moving forward amend that for incentive for reuse and recycling. We also provided a response to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, which they had an annual environment plan. And then we also hosted a workshop on extended producer responsibility for textiles. Next. Another working group really was looking at the research and data gaps that exist in this space. So textiles are not designated as a separate category of waste. And some municipalities we were finding were counting textile waste in their solid waste management or waste audits, but they weren't categorizing them beyond just lumping them together as textiles. So what we wanted to do is work with municipalities to create these sort of waste audit templates that actually broke it down from clothing to home textiles to bedding, stuffed toys, accessories, other. And then I'm going to talk a little bit later on, but we ended up doing our own waste audits because it was very challenging to build that consensus across all the different municipalities in the province of Ontario, because some municipalities found that they had more textiles in their landfills than others did. Also, there's this cost to add textiles as a waste category. Next. We also did a public awareness campaign because it was equally important for us to engage consumers, again, coming at this from a holistic perspective. No textiles belong in the garbage, and that's really our end sort of outcome objective. And so we had an agency put pro bono, did some ads for us, which we shared widely. We had the license for 2 years to run these ads, and a number of different stakeholders from across the province ran these ads, really just helping consumers understand that even if there is a button missing or a stain on the garment, there is a stakeholder in the system who can take that garment and properly reuse or recycle it. Next. And so all of this work ended up leading to, we received a grant from the Federal Ministry of Environment and Climate Change to conduct Canada's first textile recycling feasibility study. Next. And really what we did here was we looked at a couple of different things. So one was understanding the volume and the composition of the textile waste that's actually ending up in landfills in Canada. And then the second part of our research was a technical review where we looked at automated sortation as well as mechanical and chemical recycling systems around the world. And so here we classified the textiles. Oh, no. So we have the non-residential textile waste, which comes from the ICI sector, the industrial, commercial, institutional sector, as well as the apparel industry. And so that's the manufacturing, so the scraps from the fabrics and fiber mills through to retail and what is not sold or damaged or returned goods. And then on the other end, we looked at post-consumer and residential textile waste. Next. So an example, again, this is just looking at the duty drawback. This was a big media, there was a lot of media coverage from this issue that happened where a brand, and this isn't the only brand, but this brand in particular was caught putting the unsellable items into the garbage and beforehand cutting them all up. And so an angry consumer came across these bags and took photographs and posted on Facebook, and then it went completely viral. So you can see the risk that is involved for brands when they are not properly disposing. This must have been a disgruntled employee who was tired of cutting up all these children's clothes and then throwing them into the garbage. So there's definitely a lot of risk there for exposure. And again, this is just an example of how these businesses, because the incentive is there for the government to destroy the goods, and it's not for recycling or reuse. I'm just going to make sure I'm okay on time. Next. We got a lot to get through. Maybe we can just go to the next slide. So we did our own waste audit. We were, as I mentioned, the municipalities were, it was just too difficult to get them to do it. So we actually worked with 10 different municipalities across the province over the course of a year and pulled all the textiles that were out of the garbage that were actually in the waste stream. And we weighed them, we measured them, we analyzed them, were they new, what condition were they in, what was the composition of the fiber, et cetera. And what we came out of this with was that there's around 500,000 tons of textiles that go into Canada's landfill every year. And that's not even looking at the ICI sector. That's pretty much just the post-consumer side of things. Next. So we had a few recommendations for the government in our report, and you can see the report on our website. The first is to designate textiles as a waste category. If we don't measure it, we can't manage it or improve it. Textiles are most often grouped into the waste category other and aren't considered a separate source of waste, which makes it nearly impossible to find the data about textile waste in Canada. And we believe that the federal government and Canada's provinces really should monitor textiles as their own waste type. So the Environment and Climate Change Canada recently released the National Waste Characterization Report, and it's one of the few publications that shows textiles as their own waste category. Oh, sorry, my timer's going off. I know I'm over here. Sorry about that. Maybe we'll go to the next recommendation quickly. Which is to modify Memorandum 27 to D723 to remove the examples that are provided for destroyed, obsolete, and surplus goods, and to highlight the legislative requirement that the goods must become obsolete or surplus as a result of processing in Canada. So the drawback claim form should require a CBSA officer has satisfied themselves with the goods as a result of such processing. And then this, as a result, could be a low effort reform to limit the applicability of the provisions and curb the incentive to destroy goods. Next. We also believe the government should be creating incentives for reuse and recycling. There are provisions in the Customs Tariff and the Financial Administration Act for this. In the 2018 fiscal year, remissions of taxes, fees, penalties, and other debts were worth nearly $200 million. And this recommendation aims to detract from the incentive to destroy goods for the purpose of obsolete or surplus goods program, and instead have better management such as reuse or recycling. And then finally, next, we looked at encouraging the use of reclaimed fibers through, especially, we are able to actually produce chips and pellets out of synthetic materials to use as feedstock. And similarly, recycled fabrics can be made from imported recycled yarn. So we think there's an opportunity for the government to support this by encouraging the use of reclaimed fibers through procurement, import duties, and by encouraging research projects. Next. So quickly, I know I'm way over, I'm so sorry, but we are doing this pilot right now. This is the sort of current work we're doing. We've brought together another group of stakeholders where we basically are collecting in store used synthetic textiles, used garments from consumers. We're chopping and shredding them and then carding them, eventually needle punching to create a felt, working back with the retailer, who in this case is Sport Chek, to develop a new end product that will be available in stores by fall/winter 2022. The next slide shows you the stakeholders that are involved in this pilot. Those are the bins that we have in the stores. The next slide shows you the different pilot partners that are participating in this program. And then finally, we are looking to, on the next slide, you can see we're looking into a number of different areas for research, including extended producer responsibility, really doing a deep dive into the ICI sector waste, developing circular textile standards with the Canadian Standards Association, looking at sortation for mechanical recycling at scale, as well as a chemical recycling pilot. That's it. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I guess it was very interesting to hear about how you work with the government, but also with the municipalities. And I guess the consensus here is that no textiles belong in the garbage. With that said, I will move it over to our next speaker, who is Melisa Alessi from Frank and Oak. The stage is yours, Melisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Kelly. I could have listened to you keep going. I didn't want you to stop. Hopefully I'll be able to bounce off a bit of what Kelly just introduced and the great work that FTI has been doing. First off, just to introduce Frank and Oak briefly, the company was founded in 2012 in Montreal with our mission to inspire better living. And what that means for us is, as we design apparel and as we design product, we really think about the impact of the choices that we make in order to create that product, but more so as well, what will the consumer do with them and how will they interact with the product and how can we help that be better decisions in their lives. You can go to the next slide. So at Frank and Oak, our product team is really thinking about or approaching circularity with 3 pillars in mind. One is really a focus on material science. And the reason why we put a lot of focus here is that we believe that where circularity and where circular economy stands right now, this is where we have the place to do the most impact on our side, where we can own the decisions and think through for a better process. For then when great organizations like Fashion Take Action work with government policies and perfect those, we are preparing the product to be able to insert it into those better practices. We also think of circularity and we approach it by making decisions that we know are, from our understanding, create better climate positive practices. In some sort of way, one is always connected to the other, so the two go together. But and when we think of these two together, that's what brings us to think about the end product and its usable life and how the consumer is going to interact with it, with the goal of how do we help the consumer make better choices for this product that will divert it from landfill. So that's really how we approach circularity. And if you go to the next slide, I'm going to focus a bit on material science and why it is particularly important to Frank and Oak. We've definitely, we geek out when it comes to fabrics and textiles. It's really what inspires our collections. It inspires how we create our product. And we really deep dive into the fibers themselves. And we've created this kind of decisional matrix or decisional hierarchy that helps us to create a product with a better impact. So we're definitely looking at fibers that are regenerative first. That's always our first choice. Then recycled, biodegradable, organic. And our goal is to use the least amount of virgin inputs as possible. Obviously, right now, there are still virgin inputs in fibers that we cannot avoid. The technology is not there, or the proper replacement isn't there for the performance that we need. But we are continuously pushing our supply partners and the technologies that we know of to get to what we refer often to as eventual circularity. So one thing that's very important as to how we approach this is not necessarily to only think about what's available right now, but considering the policies that are changing, the technologies that are advancing at a speed much, much quicker than even just 2 or 3 years ago. We're not necessarily always looking for perfection right now, but we're looking for that improvement in the future. And how can we push the envelope to help push that improvement in the future? So we're focusing on products like, for example, Kapok, which is an amazing fiber, which is in and of itself very resistant and resilient, a great replacement or alternative to cotton. That the tree itself sequesters carbon, it uses less water, it uses less pesticide, but at its end of life, it is a highly recyclable fiber. So these are little ideas that we, why we take a position behind a fiber like that, because it makes sense to us in the global picture. Another thing that we really focus on is the post-consumer care. So we really prioritize the way we build our garments so that they are more machine washable, avoiding dry cleaning, but also so that you have pride in this product and care for it in a way so that you can put it back into a re-commerce or a resale model. Or when you are donating it, as Kelly mentioned, with understanding how to mend a certain part of your garment, should it have come undone, or remove a stain, you're just allowing that product to be in a better state for the next person, with the eventuality that at one point it will become unusable. And by the time it becomes unusable, we hope that it's gone through several hands and several different lives. And by the time it's become unusable, technology will be at a point where we will be able to extract all the possible fibers and give it a new purpose to that product. We're also looking, circularity for us is, and material science is not only for the fiber of the apparel. We also look at the trims, how we ship it. So example, we've gone towards sugarcane paper for our hang tags, which is a biodegradable, a bagasse-based paper. So again, here, being able to bring things into a circular economy to be more additive rather than extractive as an industry. You can go to the next slide. And so a great example of some products, I'm going to go over two that we were able to achieve with this thinking in mind, is what we've called our circular denim. So all of our denim at Frank & Oak is first and foremost rivetless. And we decided we conceptualized this in 2017 and launched it in 2018, which was a big risk at the time, to remove a part of a garment that is so ingrained in the DNA of this product. We understood that the metal components of the denim were deterrents to recycling and made it more difficult for the recycling at large. So we determined that it was worth taking off the rivets, and obviously we still have the zippers and the shank that we're looking to solve for, but we removed one pain point for the recycling industry. What was really great is that in 2019 or end of 2018, beginning 2019, Ellen MacArthur Foundation launched the Jeans Redesign Pledge, of which one of their suggestions was to remove the rivets. So for us, that was such a great validation to see that a foundation that we respect and admire was bringing this suggestion forward, and we had decided to do it previously. So for us, it was just a great nudge to just keep pushing, to think outside the box and to think about the future of circularity and not the current state of circularity. So if you go to the next slide. Another great example that we're really proud of is a co-branded collaboration that we just launched with Thousand Fell. So we have 4 great colorways of these fully recyclable sneakers. And when you purchase at Frank & Oak this Thousand Fell co-branded sneaker, you can return at the end of the life of your usable life for this product. You can return it through the portal. You scan the shoe, it tells you the directions of what to do with it. You return it to Thousand Fell, who then fully recycles it and creates a new product with it. Why we're really excited about this collaboration is the bigger part of the collaboration is to be able to start understanding and speaking to these single-use products that we do have in the apparel industry. So if you think of socks and intimates and shoes, these are not products that you necessarily donate or can easily have a second life. So how do we build those products for them to be recuperated in the most responsible way and reused in the most responsible way? So this is our first step into that, no pun intended, and understanding what the metrics are around this, what customer reaction is, the kind of engagement we get will help us to understand how we can extract this and apply it to our other product categories. And then the next slide, and that's it. So thank you, and I think it's very clear, and I'm super happy to hear what Kelly had to say, that the two industries really need to work together for us to move this forward.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I also think it's so interesting to hear how you really design with circularity in mind. Let's move on to the next speaker, which is Susanne Nederås from Science Park Borås in Sweden. And she's going to talk about a driving force for circular textile innovation. And with that said, I'll leave over the stage to you, Susanne.
Thank you very much. And I will talk about the textile industry, really, that we all know is about to take a giant step from being a supplier of fabrics to becoming a positive force in the development of the society. And what we are working on is close monitoring your health or measure your movements, but also technology that makes it possible to recycle and to reduce fibers, and smart, sustainable textiles that revolutionize our lives. And next slide, please. So my name is Susanne Nederås, and I'm the director of Smart Textiles, and I'm also working as a textile strategist at Science Park Borås. And thank you very much for the invitation and for having me here in this webinar. I'm really honored and happy to share with you our innovation hub, together with our cases moving the textile and fashion industry forward towards a better world. It's an academic institute, which is part of a university in the middle of Sweden. And we bring together partnerships across academia and businesses and policymakers with more than 500 research and development projects since the start in 2006. So next slide, please. So just for you to know, we have developed a strong textile cluster in Sweden, and 2013 Textile Fashion Center was open. It's the middle of Sweden, and it's really a meeting place for creative activities and in the fields of fashion, textile, and design. Next slide, please. So the history actually starts with the humidity in the region. The landscape with hills and water created really good conditions for spinning yarns and also for producing fabrics. So the passion and also to make businesses made this great history of producing and selling textiles. Next slide, please. There, thank you. So we have created here a platform for innovation, and you have all these different organizations put together in the network in this hub, with the Swedish School of Textiles, of course, in the forefront, but also with an incubator of textiles, market facilities, fashion galleries for younger designers, science park, a Swedish Museum of Textiles, and more to that. Please, the next slide. Thank you. So the focus areas that we are working on, we have divided into these 3 areas in the textile and fashion field. So sustainable textile is, of course, one big part. Smart and interactive textiles together with Industry 4.0. Next slide, please. So we have created a Do Tank Center, and which is actually a place of creating ideas and also offering companies to these facilities in doing workshops and making demonstrators. And together with the prototyping labs that we have and sharing together with the Swedish School of Textiles, we can do all processes in-house, from the fiber lab to the assembly and everything in between, which is really driving the work forward for us. And we believe that that is part of the innovation process, actually, to do these prototypes. So next slide, please. One example is the musical tablecloth, which is just sharing you one example of a prototype that is really bringing the innovation and the process further on, which is actually then to have conductive prints and with the piano and to the drums, you can have this communication. And the idea is maybe not to create tablecloth; it's more to bring the idea forward. And for example, in this case, we have had this case study as something in the project together with the health and medical sector. So this is what we are using the idea in the next step. So this is really important for us to make the prototypes. Next slide, please. I will just move forward to this. As you know, we all know the problems in the field of the textile value chain, and we have also listened to some interesting talks before here. And we have the hotspots, which you all know about. I think that you can bring the next slide. And UNEP has made this report recently, which they launched last year, and they made this together with a lot of stakeholders. And I think that maybe some of you was also part of this. And this is also showing the big hotspots here, which is, of course, the production stage, the after-use stage, which also was mentioned here, which I believe is very interesting, how you wash the garments and how you dry them and so on. And of course, then you have the fiber production, which is the third highest.
Webinar med Canada. A webinar from Canada.
Oh, excuse me, could you please?
Next slide, please.
Excuse me, could you please mute yourself? I'm not sure who we are hearing here in the webinar, but could you please mute yourself?
Okay, so I continue. So in order to take actions, we are working with a government assignment to establish a national platform where Sweden unites for a sustainable textile and fashion industry the purpose is to raise awareness, but also to drive activities and to try to unite around this different. And it was also very interesting to listen to the previous speaker also was into the same field with ecocycles and with the same, I think, idea of creating these different ecocycles in redesign and reproduction and reuse and recycling. So it's really the same ideas, and I think that we are onto something here really. Next slide, please. So one example is to look into new raw materials, which we have been doing in this project, which is textiles in 100% paper from the Swedish forest. And here we also are driving the ideas further on. Another example, next slide, please, is this project, which is a project that I think that you will listen to the next speaker, which is actually then to use the already produced material once again. So here we have also been involved in different projects in this field. Next slide, please. So another new project that we are working on is actually to establish a knowledge node for local bio-based fibers, because we believe also that it's really important to work from a regenerative perspective and prevent overconsumption of these resources. So this is also a field what we are working on. Next slide, please. Another kind of material and development project is this, where we are creating together with companies already from already used materials, create new collections of what actually didn't sell out. So this was a case together with Lindex, which is a big fashion supplier in Sweden, and they had a collection of jeans which didn't sell out, and then we made a redesign work together with them and a new collection which was sold out in 2 weeks. So this is actually something also to think about in the textile value chain, how to use already produced materials. Next slide, please. Another case is also in the field of consumption, and this is a case where we are bringing together consumers and try to change their attitudes in how they use materials and fabrics. We can move to the next, please. To help companies, we have developed a progress model where we are making this mapping together with them, also to see how they can challenge themselves to actually transform their company to a more sustainable company. So here we are guiding them together with experts for them to take next steps in the development journey. Next slide, please. One activity that we have been doing is to lift up all ideas on the table is Big Do Hackathon, which is a hackathon where we bring together developers and designers, and for them to in collaboration take their ideas into the next step and make prototypes. So we open the textile facilities that we have in-house, and for 1 week we just have this great hackathon. Next slide, please. And in this year, we created an international design hackathon together with companies from South Africa, Sweden, and the United States, with all the companies that you can see here. And this was really an interesting case where we can also see how we can challenge each other with the collaborations around the world, cross-culturals, which is really interesting. Next, please. We have the Exposé, which is actually an exhibition where we gather all these prototypes together, which we also then share. This is also a physical Exposé. It's an exhibition, but it's also a digital version. So you can go into our homepage and you can search for this in the digital Exposé. Next slide, please. And the showroom that we also have, which is open to people. So you are much welcome to come to this showroom if you are ever in Sweden. And until now, we have had more than 50,000 visitors. So it's just for you to pay a visit if you are ever in Sweden. And the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is actually what I would like to share with you today, and I thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you have been inspired how we can work together towards a better world. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Thank you also for sharing all these great initiatives and cases and showcasing them. Thank you so much. We'll move over to our final speaker for today, which is Harald Cavalli-Björkman from Renewcell. And I'll hand over the stage to you, Harald.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And it was great to see that last slide on Susanne's deck. I actually think I saw our yellow dress in the Smart Textiles showroom. Collaboration from way back from the real beginning of Renewcell. So happy to see that again. I'm Chief Growth Officer at Renewcell. We're a textile recycling company based in Sweden, and this is a picture from our warehouse at our factory in Kristinehamn, because we work with textile waste. We can jump ahead to the next slide. We're founded on the realization that we need to change the way fashion treats materials and the way the materials that go into fashion, basically. We have a growing global middle class that will consume more textiles in the future than it does today, from 110 million tons in total to maybe upwards of 160 million tons in 2030. Built on the kind of consumption patterns that you get into when you move into the global middle class, the kind of consumption patterns we in Sweden have become used to over the last 40 years. But this will not do. We will have a terrible impact on the environment, and a growing one through the fashion industry, if we don't do something about the materials that we put into making fashion. But those materials are not available. So what this slide shows is a bit complicated, but it's basically, if you think about the kind of commitments that brands are doing at the moment, and the kind of ambition that they're finally showing around changing to circular materials, much like Frank and Oak, they're way progressed in this thinking, but others are catching on. We're going to face a situation in which there's a 2 to 9 million ton demand for recycled cellulosic fibers, like viscose and lyocell, going in 2030, but a 93 to 70% gap in the availability of recycled cellulose to satisfy that demand. So this is the market that we're facing, and we're trying to help brands actually access materials that they can use in their transition. We can go to the next slide, please. Because Renewcell offers that link in the value chain to make it possible to take the textile waste that was described earlier, the type of textile waste that is collected and hopefully also sorted, and transform that into a new raw material for making new cellulosic fiber of virgin quality that can then flow back into the value chain and eventually become recycled again. We can go to the next slide, please. So zooming in on that R that was on the top of the previous figure, what it is that we do specifically is that we have a patented process for taking textiles that are rich in cotton, waste textiles that are rich in cotton, shredding them up, removing buttons, zippers, and the kind of rivets that we learned about earlier in the initial step, which is an initial dry step, and then taking that material, that fluff, and putting it into a chemical processing step in which we use conventional Swedish pulp and paper industry chemicals and a various sequence of steps, both physical and chemical, to adjust the properties of the cellulose, that is the cotton in the clothes that are coming in, to have the right properties for subsequent fiber production into new virgin fiber types. We also, in the process, separate out the small amounts of polyester, elastan, and other non-cellulose content that we have a capacity of taking out. You have to have that when you act as a chemical recycler in this industry, because even your 100% cotton t-shirt will have some polyester threads in them. So we need to take that out, and that gets separated into a reject stream. But once that is done, we have a free-floating kind of fluff that is basically pure cellulose. If you take it out and dry it in your hand, you're going to feel something that feels a lot like maybe a receipt that you forgot in your pocket if you put it into the washing machine and then take it out again. But it's wet, so in order to ship it to our customers, we need to dry it. So the last half of the plant, the process that we're running, is a drying line where we use heat and pressure to press the pulp into sheets, which we then 80 by 60 centimeters in size bale up and stamp our brand name Circulose for the material, that's circular cellulose, and sell to our customers. And what they do with these sheets looks like this, kind of hard with the background that I have on here, but looks and feels a lot like paper. It's usually made from wood, about 8 million tons per year, 200 million trees cut down to make that pulp that goes into making viscose fibers. And our customers then use those types of pulp to turn it into a liquid and then extrude it and make new fibers. So then we're back again to something that looks and feels like textiles. That means we're enabling textile to textile recycling, which has not been possible. If you studied the slide from Frank and Oak earlier, you would have seen that we have some recycled cotton, but it's really little compared to all the virgin fibers, and that's because mechanical recycling is limited in the applicability. It's a different type of fiber than your virgin fiber. No more with our innovation. You can go to the next slide, please. So what we're enabling with our innovation is a radical impact reduction compared to virgin materials in terms of CO2, in terms of biodiversity impacts, in terms of water consumption. And that's all great. You have a lot of novel materials that can enable that. Best of all is, of course, reducing consumption to begin with. But once you need new fibers, it's best to have the lowest impact type of material. Next on, what we solve is the problem of quality, getting back to a virgin type quality that consumers have gotten used to and demanded from textile fibers. Not everyone is happy enough, like I am, to use a recycled cotton t-shirt. It's a mechanically recycled cotton t-shirt. They need that kind of virgin quality feel. So we solve that by making a raw material that goes into virgin quality viscose manufacturing, viscose and lyocell manufacturing. And then the next part is that usually when you come across a novel material is that you have a massive price increase, but that's not the case with us. We have a parity in price with the type of efficient process that we're running and the type of raw material that we're putting into it. And lastly, we have the opportunity then building on that strength to go to massive scale. So this last slide, or next to last slide, is about the stage that we're in currently. We're building we're graduating from that plant that I mentioned earlier in Kristinehamn, a demo plant, into a major commercial plant built on the site of a former SCA paper mill on the Baltic Sea coast in a town called Sundsvall, where we'll be able to recycle 300 million, the equivalent of 300 million t-shirts per year. And what's really cool about this site is that we get 100% renewable energy to drive our process, which is of course important because you need energy to run these types of recycling processes. And we get to benefit from the knowledge that is already there on site with the type of people, the 800 people that were let go when that paper mill closed down. We're now able to rehire a big chunk of them to run this process instead. So we're really recycling not just knowledge, but all the infrastructure around it as well, and making a new circular product from that. We'll start up this plant in Q2 2022. We're right in the middle of the project right now. I've gotten pictures today of them installing some big pieces of machinery, and we're excited to be on time to start churning out recycled material next year. We can go to the last slide. Just lastly, I wanted to put this in a context where we're seeing a bit of interesting development, not just within fashion, but more broadly in society. It's this type of off-take investment, a guarantee to purchase novel materials that then enable scale up. So we're looking at automotives. Companies like Volvo and Volkswagen have committed to buying EV batteries from Northvolt, which enables them to build a new plant, finance and build that. The same goes for American Airlines and Neste. American Airlines buying biofuel from them so that they can build the plant to actually produce that biofuel. Same with something that was announced at COP26 just the other week. Amazon, Apple, and a whole bunch of other companies have gone into the First Movers Coalition to mobilize their purchasing power to sign contracts for technologies that are there but haven't scaled up yet. Same goes for McDonald's and Beyond Meat. They've signed 3-year deal to supply McDonald's with alternative proteins from factories that don't exist yet, but they can now invest to build. And that's exactly what we're doing with Circulose and our recycling process. We've signed a 10,000 ton per year offtake deal with H&M, 40,000 ton deal with a Chinese viscose manufacturer in order to then finance and build this capacity that we're now doing. So we're part of an industrial evolution then together of taking what's already there and making sure that we change whole industries for the better. I hope I kept my time there. That was the last slide.
You did. It's all good. Thank you so much, Harald. I really enjoyed hearing about how you recycle paper plants and also how you kind of re-employ the employees. And that's a really interesting aspect of how fashion and I guess the paper plant industry could work together in the future. With that said, a big thank you to all of our fantastic presenters today. This is really relevant for all of us since we are all essentially consumers of fashion. And it was especially interesting to hear what we can do on an individual level to contribute to the circularity of fashion and so to a better world. And so to round up this webinar, we do have a couple of questions that we have received, and I encourage you to send in your questions in the chat if you have any. There's still time. Having all these fantastic subject matter experts available at our disposal. But let's have a look at the first question that we have received earlier. The first question would be, and I'm going to let whoever is most excited to answer this question, I'm going to let you answer it. So who does the circularity of garments made using multiple components with different materials type? How does the circularity of garments, made using multiple components with different material types work? Is there anybody in the panel that would be willing to answer this question, please?
I can start by not very well.
That's what I would have said.
That's why it's encouraging to see Frank and Oak bring up the jeans redesign guidelines. We were actually part of the input into developing those guidelines, so we were very happy to see that campaign coming along. The institute's a 98% cotton or cellulose requirement on those, at least in the first iteration of those guidelines, which aligned with our capability at that time. Now it has to be we have to move on both levels. Design for circularity, more mono materials, but also on the other hand, recyclers such as us must get better to be able to take blended materials and handle them. But it's going to be difficult to be able to handle all materials. If you have a very complex product, we can't do it, and neither can the polyester recyclers.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers our first question. I also see that another question popped in just recently. So will the first production batches of Renewcell be only available to investors like H&M? If yes, then what is the time frame to open it up to smaller mid-sized brands?
We're already working with smaller and mid-sized brands. It's more of an effort on all parts because we're a raw material producer and we have to build that whole value chain going to the small and medium-sized brand. But we're willing to do that because it's important for us to make available this type of product, not just to the big giants, but also to the kind of trend leaders that the big giants then follow. We need to create that kind of pull really, because H&M and others look towards the progressive brands and see what they're doing and follow them. So we are cooperating with a number of really cool brands. Hopefully we'll have some news to share about that soon coming out. We've done some really small collabs also with artists and others already, and that's important for us to reserve that amount, but at the same time enticing the big players to make big bets and commitments so that we can shift this value chain. So we need to do both.
Thank you
I
so
just
much.
would love to make a comment, just to sort of also bring back the sort of like Canada-Sweden kind of relationship potential. But I think what I didn't have a chance to really get into was two things. One is that our research is focused on synthetics because of the fact that it's part of the federal government's plastics agenda. So right now, the feds are really interested in getting any sort of plastics out of the landfill, and they started to look at textiles as a new category. So that's the first thing. And the second is that we know chemical recycling, and what Renewcell's doing and others out there is amazing. And that is the future of recycling and garment to garment recycling. But we don't know how long it's going to take to get to scale. So this is where I think there's an opportunity for us to look to Europe to see, best practices around chemical recycling, what we could actually maybe do in Canada. But in the meantime, we've chosen the mechanical recycling route because that infrastructure does exist. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean you can't make a garment given the infrastructure that we do have here, which is why the end product for us is going to be something felted, like an accessory, a handbag, a coaster, things like that. So anyway, I just think that there's a lot of opportunity here in Canada for industry and investors and government to really start focusing on chemical recycling technologies like what Renewcell is doing. And also, I just wanted to add too, one of our stakeholders who we've been working with for many years, Bank & Vogue, I know is partnered with you as well and doing some really exciting work. So that's fantastic too.
No, definitely. Bank & Vogue is our biggest supplier and will be for a while. So we're very happy about that Canada-Sweden collaboration there. Just wanted to say also there are a few paper mills in British Columbia opening up as well. So we'll see if that happens.
Great.
Do you have any more comments from the panel on this specific question? If not, I'll move over to the second question that we have received, which kind of touch a little bit, of what you already spoke about, but I'm still going to read it up and see if we can reframe it differently. So what are the clothing brands' responsibility and best practices in enabling recyclability? So maybe that question would be good for maybe Frank and Oak. Would
Yes.
Melissa be able to answer this question, please?
Absolutely, it's a great question. I think we're still looking to understand how to responsibility. I think it's not the responsibility of the brand or the supply chain. I think it's my personal point of view is that it's a responsibility for both, and it's really understanding how do we partner together. So I think what Harold has been talking about, what Kelly has been talking about, it's sharing visibility of where our struggles lie. The question about monofiber or dual fiber versus multi-fiber, this is something that we've been talking about, particularly ourselves. How do we bring our products down to ideally a monofiber, but then speak to the pros and cons to that as a consumer at the end. So I think that's where our responsibility lies, is to understand the impact of the decisions that we make as a brand on certain aspects to increase circularity, but then what is also the responsibility of the consumer at that point? How does that change your garment? How does that change the way you use it and the expectations and the mindset? I mean, we're used to having polyester in our garments, and we're used to just washing them and sticking them in the dryer and they come out the exact same way. That doesn't hold with a 100% natural fiber product, but it's really just a mindset shift. And that's, I think that's where the brand responsibilities lie into bringing this to light and helping to educate ourselves and others as to why this is in fact about, you're losing one aspect of performance, but it is for a greater good or a greater impact. Speaking to a bit what Kelly was saying earlier about, the limitations of chemical recycling versus mechanical recycling, that's something also that, in our thought process, what we're thinking of, it's great, particularly let's say with polyester, it's great to replace with recycled polyester, but ultimately it's still a fiber that creates microplastics and microfilaments. So it's a solution, but it's not necessarily the ultimate solution that ourselves and other brands should be going for, and other and entities like Renewcell, I'm sure that this is high in their topic of conversation as well, as what is the better alternative that in the end will, to Kelly's point, we don't know how fast it will be able to scale or how quickly we'll get to that. But if we all put our minds towards it, it'll put a certain pressure on the entire value chain and get to where we want to be.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really, really good point. And just to be mindful of time, we do have one last question that I think we have time with that I'm gonna ask you to address, and that would be, the final question would be for today. Fast fashion is the second largest polluter over time. How do you address consumer behavior for the necessary change to happen? I know we touched upon it a little bit, but I think it's worth repeating. So I'm not sure, would Susanne maybe be willing to address this question?
Yeah, I can do that. Thank you. So if I understand the question correctly, it's related to the consumer behavior and how this eventual change is affecting or could be a big part of the change. Yeah. So what we believe actually in the textile and fashion industry is if we could from today's more or less 2 years usage of fabric or garment go and extend this up to 8 or 10 years. And here we believe that this extend would actually then make it's possible to change the industry to a more circular industry. And in order to do this, we have the different stages as we have been discussing today, with reuse, remake, repair, and so on. But there is also to extend the consumer and consuming of the garment. But also, as we have been seeing and looking into some projects that I shared today, where actually we see that consumers should there can be different solutions to this. Some consumers might use material that is more secondhand, but some other consumers is it can also be, for instance, that you turn into a shop, you turn in your clothes, and this clothes is used by another user. So it doesn't mean necessarily that you are using the garment for a longer time by yourself. It's more to extend the whole idea. But we believe that there are different drivers among these people. Some consumers, they would like to extend their own usage of that specific garment, but in some other cases they would like to maybe turn it into a shop or make maybe a renting system where they only rent clothes, and then there is like another kind of consumption into that. So we believe that it has a strong impact, and there is a big attitude change to be able to do this in combination to everything that we're talking about. So there is no one solution. There is many solutions, we think, to be able to bring the textile and fashion industry into a circular one.
Thank you so much for
addressing
that.
I popped things into the chat, but it is important that we stop saying things like it is the second largest polluter, because it's not. So I think a lot of it from a consumer perspective is also just to do your research and really, educate ourselves. Yes, industry should be helping out with that too, but I think we also need to be doing better at that. And then also we created something called the 7 R's. So just to jump off what Susanne was talking about, it's just a really easy way for consumers to think about how they can be more circular in terms of their consumer behavior.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, Kelly. And with that said, I would like to go to our final slide for today. So once again, a big thank you to all of our fantastic presenters, and also thank you for joining us for this webinar today on the evolving circular fashion landscape in Sweden and Canada. So what happens now is that you will shortly receive both the presentations and the recordings from today's webinar in your emails. I hope this webinar really leaves you with some food for thought. And again, I would like to further reinforce the fact that we all can do something by repairing and reusing as much as possible before recycling. So please feel free to contact me if you have any further questions. You can see my contact details at the very bottom end of the page. And thank you so much. And thanks again to all of our fantastic presenters, and have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Bye.